Okay, so we want things to show up as students accomplish them throughout your different sections of your class. And we do have the ability to hide all these things and unhide them all, which is what a majority of teachers do because they don't know how to do the other way, which is what I'm going to show you today. Hiding and unhiding, it has turned out, has become the bane of some teachers' existence because they're like, oh my gosh, you know how much stuff I have in my course, you know how much stuff I have to hide, and then I forget to unhide stuff. And I understand that. It takes a lot of time to unhide and hide stuff. As an alternative, you can do what I'm going to show you to do today, which is to use Moodle restrictions to make things just appear. So we're going to do that with this chapter 7. The first thing you have to do in order for you to make any of these changes is go to edit settings for your class, go down to the bottom where it says completion tracking, and you have to enable it. So I'm going to say yes to enable completion tracking, and now things can be tracked that students complete. And I'm back on chapter 7 now. I'm going to turn editing on. Right now, nothing looks like it's changed. And as a student comes into this section, they're going to see all of it just like it is. And I'm going to have to go through one item at a time and decide how I want students to see and what I want them to see. So when my students come into my class, the only thing I want them to see is this list of icons. I want them to come into a new section and say, these are the objectives of the class. And they know that every single course section, they have to click on that before anything else appears. So the first thing I have to do is make this be completed somehow. It is a web page. The only thing they can do on it is to look at it. So I have to go to Edit Settings. And just like I did when I made this page, now down here, because I turned on activity completion, I have this thing that says activity completion. And by default, it says do not indicate activity completion, and I have options on this dropdown. And my one I choose is show activity is complete when conditions are met, and the only condition is students must view this activity. So I have to check it. So now as soon as a student views this, it's complete. And I have to have things complete in order to have something else rely on it. So there are, and you saw that, there are the option of do not, student can do it manually. I never do that personally because I miss that, or it automatically happens because of something. So I'm going to hit save and return to course. And now when I do that, I'm going to see there's a checkbox and it has a dashed line around it, and that means it's completed automatically. And when they complete that, now I want other stuff to happen. So I'm going to go to the second thing, which is this self-assessment that they do every class to say how they feel about where they are right now. I'm going to go to Edit Settings again. And now I'm going to use both these things, restrict access and activity completion. First of all, I'm going to restrict access. And it says there's no restriction. I'm going to add one. Activity completion, and the very top option says previous activity with completion. That has to be done, and I'm going to poke that in the eye, which says it's hidden in any other case. So now this is hidden until they read the thing before, and now it's unhidden. So I don't have to hide and unhide anything, it just happens. But now I want this to make something else happen below it. So I have to say activity completion again. Do not indicate. I'm going to switch it to as complete when conditions are met. And now they have to have submitted the feedback to complete it. I have the option. You see a new one. I had, hey, they could just view it. I'm not sure what that's going to do for me. They have to actually submit it. They have to complete it. I'm going to say save and return to course. And now here in chapter 7, it says this thing is restricted, not available unless the previous activity is marked complete, hidden otherwise. So I'm going to continue working through this to show you how this works. This chapter reading, this label isn't even going to show up. I'm going to say edit settings. I'm going to say restrict access, activity completion, activity completion, and it's going to say previous activity. And I'm going to poke it in the eye. So now when they come in here, this label doesn't show up, and I'm going to make it so this doesn't show up either. So I'm going to go to hard drives, and I'm going to go down to edit settings. This is a chapter book. I'm going to restrict the access again to activity completion, poke it in the eye, previous activity. I'm also going to have an activity completion on this of show when conditions are met, students must look at it to complete it. So I've done the same thing. Now in chapter 7, when somebody comes in, they're going to see the icons. And they're not going to see this or this or this, because all of these things rely on something ahead of it having been done before they can get to the next thing. I'm going to go down here and do the same thing. On this label, if they haven't looked at the book, they're not going to see the activities. So I'm going to say edit settings, restrict access, add restriction, activity completion, and poke it in the eye and say previous activity with completion. Now, there's no completion on a label because it's just going to show up. So now this, I'm not on chapter 7 somehow. Now this label doesn't show up. And I don't want this first activity to show up until I've done the reading. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to edit. Now, you're saying, how is this better than hiding and unhiding it? Because I do this once and I never do it again. Everything in my course relies on something ahead of it being done in order for you to see the next thing. Now, I'm using one kind of completion. Let me go ahead and finish this. Edit setting. I'm going to go down here, restrict access, add restriction, activity completion, poke it in the eye, previous activity, and now I'm going to have a completion on this one. This is actually an in-class activity. So we're going to track this one. We're going to say show activity complete when students must receive a grade to complete. Now, I could say passing grade, which means I could say you've got to get a 90%. You've got to keep doing it over and over again. But this is a formative assessment they do during my class before I move on with my instruction. You don't have to have 100% in the formative. I want to know what you actually know, so I don't do that. So I'm going to say save and return to course. So now you can see down here this, and I realize I'm making it look busy with all this extra stuff, but nobody sees that other than me. So now this is not available unless the previous activity is marked complete, hidden otherwise, and I go ahead and I keep marching through and doing the same thing, add a restriction, activity completion, poke it in the eye, previous activity. I have to mark that this one's complete, same way I just did, receive a grade, save and return to course. So now as a student comes in here, they only see one thing at a time once I get it all done, my entire class. Now, I'm going to jump down here to this project down here, and I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm going to say edit settings with my label. I want to show you one other thing. I'm going to do previous activity and return to course. Now, I'm doing previous activity on all these things. I'm just saying, hey, it goes in order, they're marching down the class. You don't have to do it that way. You can have things show up based on other things. So let's say this project is something that you do if you're not on a 504 or an IEP. And I have something else you do if you're on a 504 or an IEP, a different project for limited readers, for instance. So I'm going to go ahead and restrict this. Let me go to edit and edit settings. And I'm going to hit the restrict access, and I'm going to kind of go through a couple more of the settings here. When I go to add restriction, I've been doing this activity completion up top. You can see there's way more ways to restrict. You can do it based on the date. You can do it which I don't ever do, by the way. You can do it based on grades. So students that have A's see this thing, B's see this thing, C's see this thing. You can do it based on groups, which I'm going to show you right now. So I'm going to say, hey, you have to have completed the previous activity, but I'm going to add another restriction and say you also have to be in the group of, we'll say this is for the gifted students, okay? And I'm also going to poke that in the eye. And this says must match all of the following. You have to finish the previous thing and be gifted to see this new thing. I'm going to go ahead and make an activity completion down here and say students must, we're going to say they have to receive a grade to do the, oh, I'm working on a quiz right now. I thought I was working on the project. What the heck did I click on? Oh, I clicked on that right there. That the gifted students are going to take this particular quiz. My point that what I'm trying to make is that it doesn't have to be pointed to something right before it. That's the easiest thing to do. Say previous activity, it's marching down. But for instance, this project, I could just as easily point it to anything else in the course with those restrictions. I can do any activity. You can see every activity that's being completed in my entire course is on that list, which is why it's way easier just to pick the top one that says previous activity. So, and also as I move things around, it's always the previous one in the course, so I don't have to repoint things. But you can see that I could do it based on any activity that's currently being tracked in my course, and there's a ton of them, which is why I always do that one. It just makes it easier. You can also restrict it based on a number of different things, and what a restriction set does is it says, allows you to do an and or thing. So I'm going to say, hey, it's got to be previous, and the group has to be 504, or the group has to be IEP, and I'm saying any. So, hey, if the students are either 504 or IEP, then they get to see this activity. So I've just made it so that one ahead of it's for gifted students, this one's for 504 and IEP students. So you can see how you can really make things show up differently for different students. Restrictions, the previous activity thing is all you really need to do for most teachers, but you can also use it to differentiate in your class, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And I think that's all I really needed to show you on how to make things show up automatically as you go. Again, this looks like it's a little more time intensive. It's probably about 3 or 4 more clicks per thing that you do in your class. But you do it once, it happens automatically. I never have to hide anything. I never have to show anything. It just happens for my students as they work through the course, and the bottom thing that they see in that particular section is always the one that we're working on at this time.